The Bluetooth device is connected successfully. The Bluetooth device is ready to pair.
So can we start, or we should still wait a few minutes?
The Bluetooth device is connected successfully.
Hare Krishna, Salika Prabhu.
The Bluetooth device is ready to pair.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Jai Vansha Kalpataram Vyascha, Kripasin Vyaya Vacha Panichanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namo.
The participants are 10 now. I don't know if we can still wait for
a few minutes. Okay.
The Bluetooth device is connected successfully.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Bhakti Isaac, how are you?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Bhakti. Hare Krishna. Wait. Omagyanat Miridasya Gyanan Ganashalakaya Chachuram Litam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Snapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dilati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuktapada Kamalam Sri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragnastam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakam Vitam Scha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Tirtha Swaminiti Namine Namaste Krishna Padaya Prabhupada Shri Tadmane Shri Gaura Karuna Shanti Bhakti Tirtha Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvase Sasuyamani Pasachahadi Satarini Vanchakalpatarabhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Ivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namini Gauratvide Namaha Nityananda Vatutendur Vasude Pranavalabha Janaviri Jivita Patir Krishna Prema Pradaprabhu Padmavati Sutta Srimam Sachirananda Purvajaha Bhavam Mata Jagatrata Rata Gora Kile Varaha Advaitam Harinadvaita Racha Shamshanat Bhaktavataram Bhaktam Sham Advaita Acharya Shraye Panchatattvamakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakti Shaktikam Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandha Jagatpate Gopesha Gopita Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Jayatam Srato Pango Mama Majirgati Masarvaswa Padam Pujo Radha Mandana Mohano Divyad Vrindaranya Kalpadrumada Srimad Pranadgara Simhastanastau Sri Sri Radha Srila Govinda Devo Pristhyali Sevya Manosmarami Shrimam Rasa Rasarambi Vamsivata Tatastita Karasan Venuswanai Gopi Gopinata Sri Estunaha Taptakan Chanagaurangi Radhe Bindavanishwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nana Shastra Vicharina Nipano Sadharma Samstapako Lokena Hita Karuna Tribhuvane Manya Sharanya Karo Radha Krishna Padara Vrindavan Nandena Mataliko Vande Rupa Sanatana Raguyugo Sri Jiva Gopalaka Vande Rupa Sanatana Raguyugo Sri Jiva Gopalaka Vande Rupa Sanatana Raguyugo Sri Jiva Gopalaka. So we completed lesson 1 yesterday, and we are starting with lesson 2 today. Lesson 2 entails chapters 1, 2, and 3. It's a summary study of chapters 1, 2, and 3. And we have almost 30 slides to go through. But before we proceed, I always want us to remind ourselves of some of the major points that we discussed yesterday as a way of reviewing the lesson. So can we remember a few things from yesterday? Things that we discussed yesterday. Can we remember a few things?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Never pronounced.
Never.
I remember the 3 characteristics of devotional service, where we said devotional service must be for only Krishna.
Okay.
The second one is it must be free from any material conception or philosophies. And then it must be an active engagement. That's what I remember.
Yeah, that is called the Swaru Lakshana. The Swaru Lakshana, the intrinsic nature of pure devotional service. So it must be free from philosophical speculation. It must be done purposely for Krishna, and it must be an active engagement, constantly engage in Krishna's service. Yes, thank you. Any other contribution, any other thing we can remember from yesterday?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Yesterday we also talk about the 4 waves of devotional service. Talking about the eastern, western, southern, and northern divisions.
Yeah, the divisions of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. The ocean of Bhakti is divided into eastern section, which deals in varieties of devotional service. Then we have the southern section, which is the overview of rasas. And then the western section deals with the primary rasas. And the northern section deals with the secondary rasas. And so, our study, our course only deals with the eastern section. That is the varieties of devotional service. There is Samananya Bhakti, which is dealing with general devotional service. Then we have Sadhana Bhakti that deals with devotional service in practice. Then we have Bhava Bhakti that deals with devotional service in ecstasy. And then we have Prema Bhakti, which is the perfection of love of Godhead. So these are the areas that we shall be looking into. The eastern section of the ocean of devotional service, of ocean of Bhakti. And it has 4 waves or laharis. And these 4 waves are Samananya Bhakti, Sadhana Bhakti, Bhava Bhakti, and Prema Bhakti. Yes. Any other contribution?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
You also said that we have to work on our bodily designations.
That's right.
I mean, yes, that we are eternally Krishna Das.
That's right. Yes, the bodily designation is our problem. Material life means bodily designation. Everyone thinks he is the body. Everyone identifies with his position. Everyone identifies with his race. Everyone identifies with his tribe. Everyone identifies with his family. These are all nations. We are none of these. We are none of them. We are Krishna Nitya Das. We are eternal servants of Krishna. But now we identify with so many things, so many external things. So these are bodily designations. So therefore, one has to do away with these designations by engaging in Krishna consciousness, by serving Krishna, engaging the body, engaging the senses, engaging the mind, engaging whatever we have in the service of Krishna. That is the natural position. And that is what will actually satisfy the soul. Any other thing may give us some temporary satisfaction. That is a fact. But again, we feel hungry because the soul is not nourished. Any other contribution?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Madhava Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Maharaj. You mentioned about Diksha, taking initiation from spiritual master.
Yeah.
That is very, very important.
Mm.
Then at the same time, you also mentioned that there's exceptions like George Harrison, who did take physical initiation, but because of his involvement in devotional service, that Prabhupada accepted him as his disciple. And that's why it remains his name. He didn't have special name.
Yes, Diksha is so important. Diksha is a link between the Jiva and Krishna. And the duty of the spiritual master is to facilitate that link by giving Diksha. And it's actually said in the Hari Vilas that at the time of initiation, Krishna actually accepts the disciple to be as good as himself. So it is a very important function, important activity that every jiva has to go through, except a few exemptions. So, but generally, everyone has to accept Diksha, and by that Diksha, one is connected to Krishna. So, it's an important aspect of Bhakti. Okay, thank you, all of you. And today we're going to look at chapters 1, 2, and 3. That is for lesson 2, lesson 1, and lesson 2. And so, Sanika Prabhu will share the screen. So next slide, slide 48. Okay, so again, we have a summary of the Purva Vibhaga. Purva means east. Purva Vibhaga is the eastern ocean of the Nectar devotion, which has 4 waves. And these 4 waves are Samanya Bhakti, the overview of devotional service in general. That is chapter 1. Second wave is Sadhana Bhakti. That is devotional service in practice. And that is from chapters 2 to 16. Third wave is Bhava Bhakti, devotional service in ecstasy. That is chapter 17 and 18. And the fourth wave is Prema Bhakti, devotional service in pure love of God. And that is chapter 19. So this is the breakdown of the chapters. Next slide. The manifestation of unadulterated devotional service. Lakshanam Bhakti Yogasya Nirgunasya Hi Odaritam Ahaituki Avya Vahita Ya Bhakti Purushotame. The manifestation of unadulterated devotional service is exhibited when one's mind is at once attracted to hearing the transcendental name and qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is residing in everyone's heart. Just as the water of the Ganges flows naturally down towards the ocean, such devotional ecstasy, uninterrupted by any material condition, flows towards the Supreme Lord. Krishna. So taking shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is a primary quality of pure devotional service. One cannot claim to be a devotee or advanced devotee without fully taking shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We see in the prayers of Queen Kunti, she's praying to Krishna to cut her attachments to the two families, the Vrishnis and the Pandavas. Kunti's mind was divided between her paternal family, which are the Vrishnis, and his husband's family, which are the Kurus or the Pandavas. And because of that division, Kunti Devi is thinking that she is not fully absorbed in Krishna's, she is not fully absorbed in the thoughts of Krishna. Therefore, she was praying to Krishna that please cut my relationship with the two families, the Vrishnis and the Pandavas, so that my mind can flow to you naturally, like the waters of the Ganges that naturally flows towards the sea. It is not a mechanical process. One cannot be attached to Krishna. One's mind cannot be attracted to Krishna unless one is completely free from all kinds of attachments. Once our mind is still attracted, still attached to some mundane situation, it is very difficult for the mind to flow naturally toward Krishna. Therefore, Queen Kunti is teaching us that we need absolute concentration, absolute focus on Krishna. And so that is a natural position, the natural tendency of the pure devotee of the Lord. He takes full shelter of Krishna. And once one takes full shelter of Krishna, all other qualities will follow. So the primary function of a devotee is to take shelter of Krishna. So Nectar devotion is that science that teaches us how to fully surrender to Krishna. So by the end of this study, we should know that science, how to fully surrender to Krishna. And actually, that is the whole program of Bhakti. The whole program of Bhakti is to bring the jiva to the point of surrender. Actually, we cannot do without surrender. We either surrender to Krishna or we surrender to the material energy. We surrender to Durga. Durga is the superintendent of the material energy. So we either surrender to Krishna or we surrender to Durga. But when we surrender to Krishna, our life is blissful. And when we surrender to Durga, our life is miserable. So therefore, we have to choose where we want to surrender. So surrender is considered full surrender, full shelter, taking full shelter of Krishna is considered a primary function, the primary function of the living entity. And this leads to unadulterated devotional service. Once one's mind is focused on Krishna, then there is every opportunity to render unadulterated service. The next verse, the next slide. Go to the next slide. The next slide says, the supreme attitude of a pure devotee. So once one has taken shelter of the Supreme Lord, he has a particular attitude. So the attitude is defined here. Shalokya Sastri Samipya Swarupai Kaptvam Api Utaha. Niyamananam na grinanti vina matsevanam janaha. A pure devotee does not accept any kind of liberation. Salokya, Shasti, Samipya, Sarupya, or Ekatwa, even though they are offered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The pure devotee means one who has fallen in love with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One who has fallen in love with the Supreme Personality of Godhead will naturally want to remain a servant of the Lord. And therefore, he wants to remain a servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Actually, it is said that out of the 5 types of liberation, which are mentioned here, Salokya, Shasti, Samipya, Sarupya, Ekatwam. Ekatwam is also called Sayujya. Out of these, Sayujya or Ekatwam is rejected by devotees because that is the one whereby one merges into the Brahman effulgence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Of course, the other 4, Shalokya, Shasti, Samipya, Sarupya, they may be accepted by a devotee in the service of the Lord. But if they are just meant for the personal pleasure of the devotee, and the devotee also rejects them. So Sayujya Mukti is devoid of service to Krishna. To merge into the Brahman effulgence means to be devoid of service, to be without service. Because in the Sayujya Mukti, in the Brahman Jyoti, there is no activity of devotional service. So those who attain to this Sayujya Mukti They are actually like in a coma situation. They are in an inactive situation, without service, without interaction with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that is considered suicide. It's a suicide because the soul, the jiva, is always active in Krishna consciousness. But when a jiva enters into Brahman, it becomes inactive. And therefore, some acharyas say that is as good as the suicide, spiritual suicide, because one cannot engage in bhakti when one enters the Brahman platform. But Salokya, Sastri, Samipya, Swarupya are of two kinds. When the living entity engages in these forms of liberation for their own pleasure, then it is also rejected. One accepts Salokya, Sastri, Samipya, and Sarupya for the purpose of pleasing the Supreme Lord. So it is said that one can accept these four forms of liberation based on personal pleasure or based on service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the first instance, the living entity is interested in his own pleasure. And such, the pure devotees reject. In the second instance, where prema seva dominates, the living entity accepts these four types of liberation for serving Krishna. And that is accepted. So pure devotees, they reject these four types of liberation if it is meant for their own pleasure, if it is meant for satisfying their individual desire, it is rejected. But if it is meant to give pleasure to Krishna, if it is dominated by prema seva, devotional service, giving pleasure to Krishna, then they accept it. So that's why it says here, a pure devotee does not accept any kind of liberation. Salokya, Shasti, Samipya, Sarupya, Ekatwa. Ekatwa or Sayujwa is completely rejected, because it is merging. A devotee does not merge with the Supreme Lord. It is considered hellish to merge into the existence of the Supreme Lord. But for the rest, the four others, Salokya, Shasti, Samipya, Sarupya, a devotee may accept them in the service of Krishna. A devotee may accept them if it is going to give him an opportunity to serve Krishna, if it enhances his service to Krishna. But a devotee will never accept them for his individual pleasure. So the pure devotee may accept these four types of liberation for the service of Krishna, for enhancing Krishna's pleasure, but not for himself. So that should be understood. So we go to the next slide, 51. Which says, the next slide, 51. Okay. It says, a pure devotee abhors ekatwa. A pure devotee does not desire ekatwa, oneness with the Supreme Lord as desired by the impersonalists, the mental speculators, and the meditators. To become one with the Supreme Lord is beyond the dream of a pure devotee. Sometimes he may accept promotion to the Vaikuntha planets to serve the Lord there, but he will never accept merging into the Brahman effulgence, which he considers worse than hellish. Such a katwa, or merging into the effulgence of the Supreme Lord, is called kaivalya. But the happiness derived from kaivalya is considered by the pure devotees to be hellish. Actually, the impersonalists, because they have no idea of what devotional service is, they have no idea the joy of Krishna Bhakti. So that's why they opt for this kaivalya, which is considered as the water contained in a hoof print of a calf. When a calf steps in mud, it creates a hole. And that hole, when it rains, it collects water. That water is so insignificant when compared to the ocean. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is a great, great ocean, a very deep ocean, divided into 4 sections. We cannot compare this footprint of a calf, water contained in a footprint of a calf, to this great ocean of bhakti. And because the impersonalists, they have no idea of the supreme personality of God, and they have no idea of the bliss involved in devotional service. They go for this little puddle of water. But the devotees who are compared to sharks, they swim deep in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the ocean of bhakti. They remain in the deep sea, enjoying Krishna consciousness. So a pure devotee, he abhors ekatwa. Ekatwa means sayujya, merging into the Brahman effulgence, merging into the Lord. So this is not accepted by the pure devotees of the Lord. So devotional service is such a blissful activity that even in the beginning of bhakti, the bhakta is happy, engaging in the activities of devotional service, engaging in chanting, in hearing, in performing kirtan, in taking prasadam, in associating with devotees. From the very beginning of bhakti, there is great joy and Krishna consciousness, even for a neophyte devotee. Want to speak of the advanced devotee who is diving deep into the nectarian ocean of bhakti. So therefore, the pure devotee, he abhors Sayujya Mukti or Ekatvam, merging into the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We can go to the next slide. So that takes us to the characteristics of pure devotional service. We are trying to establish the position of the pure devotee. The pure devotee has no other desire except pleasing Krishna. The pure devotee has no other aspiration except thinking of how he can give Krishna pleasure. That is the prime duty of the advanced devotee. As we see in the lives of the gopis, their only business is to give Krishna pleasure. And whatever it takes them to give Krishna pleasure, they're ready. Even if there are so much inconvenience, still they accept that inconvenience as devotional service. So these 6 characteristics of devotional service are mentioned in this slide. They are kleshagni. Kleshagni means relief from material distress. That means once you engage in pure devotional service, one is immediately relieved from all material distress. That is called kleshagni. 2 is subhada. Subhada means auspiciousness. Once one gets to the platform of pure devotional service, immediately he attracts all auspiciousness. Auspiciousness will appear in his life. 3 is moksha lagu takrita. Moksha lagu lakrita. Moksha lagu takrita means pure devotional service derives happiness of liberation. 4 sudrulabha. Pure devotional service is very rare. It is really achieved. 5 sandrananda visheshadma. Once one achieves pure devotional service, he is imbued with transcendental pleasure. He swims in the ocean of transcendental pleasure. And 6, Sri Krishna Karshani. Sri Krishna Karshani means that pure devotional service is so powerful that it attracts Krishna. Pure devotional service is so wonderful that even Krishna himself becomes attracted to pure devotional service. So these are the 6 characteristics of pure devotional service. Actually, we are supposed to memorize them, both the Sanskrit and English. It is most likely to be one of your closed book questions. Practically every time this question comes up, the 6 characteristics of pure devotional service. And when you can give all the Sanskrit terms and the English translations, English meanings, then you can score full marks. So it is important to take note of the meanings and the Sanskrit words. Kleshagni, relief from material distress. Subhadra brings auspiciousness. Moksha, Lagutta, Krita. It derives happiness and liberation. Sudurlabha, very rarely achieved. Sadrananda, Vishishatma, imbues one with transcendental pleasure. And Sri Krishna Karshani, it even attracts Krishna. Somebody wants to ask a question?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Will it be possible for us to get the presentation?
Why not?
Yeah.
I've given it to Srika Prabhu. He can share with you, or maybe we can send it to the coordinator Chaitanya Prem Prabhu to share with all of you.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
I have a question here.
Yes, please.
This is characteristics of pure devotional service.
Yeah.
To my understanding, is describing the glories of Bhakti.
Okay.
But that was a discussion that I had with some devotees sometimes back, and there was a heated argument, but I had to submit because I didn't want to argue.
Okay.
His understanding was that these symptoms manifest only in pure devotees. But I said, this test does not state pure devotees. It states the pure devotional service. So in other words, if one takes to the process of devotional service and it starts chanting, it does not necessarily have to become a pure devotee to start experiencing one or more of these symptoms. Can you shed light on this?
Well, yeah, these are the characteristics of pure devotional service. They are characteristics. In other words, once you get to that platform of pure devotional service, you will experience all of these characteristics. Definitely. But we can also say that in the process of performing bhakti, one will experience them even though one has not come to that pure level, because it is actually mentioned that these characteristics can be experienced on different levels. In sadhana bhakti, one experiences the first two in sadhana bhakti, kleshagni and subhadra. Yeah, because we can see that when you take to bhakti, you feel very relieved. It's a practical experience. So one who is performing sadhana bhakti can experience the first two. And by chanting Hare Krishna, by practicing Krishna consciousness, you are bringing in auspiciousness to your life. And that also we can see that by taking to the path of bhakti, so many auspicious things are happening in our life, even though we are not yet pure devotees. So therefore, in sadhana bhakti, the first two are experienced. In bhava bhakti, once you get to a level of bhava bhakti, you experience the next two, which is moksha, lagutta, and sudurlabha. That is, one derives happiness and liberation, and one can see how rare devotional service is. On the bhava platform, devotional service in ecstasy, one can see how the materialists are suffering, because the pleasure one gets from bhava bhakti, you can see the devotional service is there. You can see That is a very rare situation for one to experience Bhava Bhakti. And then when one gets to the platform of Prema Bhakti, then he can experience Sadrananda Visheshatma and Sri Krishna Karshani. So on each level, one experiences two of these characteristics. But when one becomes a pure devotee, he experiences all of them. So your argument is right that at different levels, you experience different qualities or characteristics of pure devotional service.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So we can move to the next slide. So this slide is talking about like Shangni, that is relief from all distress. Srila Goswami says that the distress from sinful activities are due both to the sins themselves and to the sins committed in our past lives. Generally, one commits sinful activities due to ignorance. But ignorance is no excuse for evading the reaction and his sinful activities. Sinful activities are of two kinds, those which are mature and those which are not yet mature. The sinful activities for which we are suffering at the present moment is called mature. The many sinful activities stored within us for which we have not yet suffered are considered immature. So causes of distress. Causes of distress is sin. It's called papa. Sin is the causes of distress. And these come from papa bija. Papa bija means the seeds of sin. And where does these seeds come from? They come from avidya. Avidya means ignorance. So because the living entity is ignorant, he engages in sinful activities. And these sinful activities, they are like seeds. Actually, the desire to engage in sinful activities are the seeds. And these seeds mature into actual sins. And then when the sinful activity is performed, the reactions come. And the reactions produce suffering. So, avidya or ignorance is a cause of sin. One who is ignorant, one who has no knowledge, one who is not educated spiritually will by all means commit all kinds of sins, like people eating meat, drinking alcohol, drinking wine, smoking cigarette, breaking all the principles. They are doing it out of ignorance. They do not know that these activities they are performing is going to bring reactions. So out of ignorance, they engage in these activities. But one who is in knowledge will not engage in such activities. Once the action is performed, once the sinful action is performed, it is it becomes aprarabdha. Aprarabdha means reaction. Once you perform the sinful activity, it becomes a seed. It begins to germinate. And with time, the results will come. It's like somebody who steals, but he's not caught. But he has already performed a sin. But in due course of time, he will be caught. The sin would mature, and he will be caught. And when he's caught, then he begins to suffer for the sin that he has committed. So sinful action leads to aprarabdha, or unmanifested reaction. And from the unmanifested reaction, it goes to the manifested reaction, and that is called prarabdha. So the first stage is the person performs the sinful action. The results do not come immediately. Of course, in some cases, we perform the sinful reaction and instantly the results mature, and we have to suffer the reaction immediately. In some cases, it happens like that. But in most cases, when the sin is performed, the reaction does not come immediately. So it is called the unmanifested stage, and that is called aprarabdha. When the sinful reactions come, when they become manifest, that is called prarabdha. And it is that level that one begins to suffer. One begins to experience the reaction of his sinful activities. So it's a cycle, actually. It's a cycle. Papa, sinful action, leads to aprarabdha, that is unmanifested reactions. And then the aprarabdha goes to prarabdha, which is the manifested reaction. But because of this unmanifested reaction, which is aprarabdha, one is also inclined to perform more sins. And this is called kutam. That is sinful desires. The unmanifested reaction also leads to sinful desires, which is called kutam. And this sinful desires leads to bijam, the seeds of sin. And these seeds will lead to papam, sinful activities. And the sinful action will again go into aprarabdha, unmanifested reaction. And from the unmanifested reaction, it becomes manifested, which is prarabdha. And then the unmanifested reaction influences the living entity to perform, to be inclined to more sins, which is kutam. And then kutam leads to bijam, the seeds, and these seeds go back to sinful reaction. So it's a cycle. I think I have a simple cycle in the next slide. So we have causes of suffering, avidya. Avidya means ignorance. Once we are ignorant of what is sin, we will engage in sinful activities. And this leads to what is called bijam. Bijam means material desire or sinful desire. And the sinful desire will lead to papam. Papam means sinful action. And then the sinful action leads to aprarabdha. Aprarabdha means unmanifested reaction. And the aprarabdha leads to prarabdha, which means manifested reaction, and that brings suffering. So this is the cycle of sinful action, sinful activities. And this is the cause of all suffering. If you go to the next slide, which is, Prabhu has already shown it, The next slide talks about the stages of sinful action. First is papam, sinful action. That leads to aprarabdha, which is unmanifested reaction. And then from aprarabdha, it becomes prarabdha, which is the manifested reaction that brings suffering. But then, because of aprarabdha, one becomes inclined to sinful action. And that leads to kutam. Kutam means inclination towards sinful action. And this kutam leads to bijam. Bijam means seeds of sin. It is this seeds of sin or desire for sin that leads to papam, sinful action. So it's a cycle. And this cycle has to be broken. And how do we break the cycle? By taking to Krishna consciousness. So let's move to the next slide.
Krishna Maharaj.
Yes.
Please, I want to ask a question.
Please ask.
I want to know if indeed there is truly something called ignorance. Because from experience, even though if you are not self-realized, when you are about to perform an action, your mind can enforce standard to tell you that this is right, this is wrong. And as it's always said, that ignorance is no excuse. Is there really ignorance? I had this experience at workplace, and a senior man of mine came to me and he was like, what is your idea on the use of contraceptives, like condoms, excuse me to say? Yeah. So I'm like, you know that this thing is bad. You yourself, your mental faculties will tell you that the use of this thing is bad. It's as equal as abortion. Another elderly man sitting somewhere told me that even though they know that the use of this thing is sinful, what can they do? There's nothing they can do about it. So I drew a conclusion that people really do certain things which they know might bring reactions, but they go ahead and do it even though they know that the reaction may come. So is there really something called ignorance, that someone is ignorant of an action is going to perform in the result that is possible to come? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, the ignorance that we are talking about here is the ignorance of our identity, ignorance of our duty, ignorance of Krishna, ignorance of devotional service. Because if we understand that we are Jivatma, Krishna Das, Nitya Krishna Das, we are eternal servants of Krishna, we are aware that we are meant to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. And we understand that our real joy, our real happiness is Krishna consciousness. Then why should we engage in sinful activities? But because we are ignorant of our actual identity as spirit souls, we are ignorant of our function, that is service to Krishna, and we are ignorant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, we think we are the enjoyers, we are the controllers, we are the proprietors of all what we survey. Then what happens? Sinful activity. So the ignorance here is ignorant of our actual position, ignorant of our function, constitutional position, and ignorant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so these combine to influence the living entity to try to enjoy, and therefore
come this side, come this side.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Could this cause of sinful activities or engaging in sinful activities, as my brother just said, be linked to the answer given by Krishna to Arjuna in chapter Pre-test.
Actually, Krishna also says it's due to lust. That lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity. So, yes, but where from the lust? Because we have forgotten our duty. The living entity said that when the living entity gives up Krishna's service, Krishnandriya Prema, when the living entity gives up Krishna's service, activities that are meant to please our senses are called karma or lust. And activities for pleasing Krishna's senses are called prema or love. So when the living entity gives up Krishna's service, then he is overpowered by lust, karma. So karma or lust comes when we are no more in touch with Krishna. When we have forgotten our identity, we have forgotten Krishna, we have forgotten devotional service, then at that time, lust will take over. But of our constitutional position, there is no question of lust. So lust comes when the living entity forgets Krishna. And that is the ignorance. That is the root of all ignorance. As soon as we forget Krishna and we want to put ourselves in the position of Krishna, then we become controlled by lust. And we cannot resist the powers of lust. So lust is our greatest enemy, but how does it come about? It comes when we forget Krishna. So we can trace everything back to this root. The root cause of lust is forgetfulness of Krishna. The root cause of lust is forgetfulness of our identity. The root cause of lust is forgetfulness of our constitutional position. And that is ignorance. So we can trace everything back to this cause. And that is why Rupa Goswami is giving us this nectar of devotion to reinstate us in our original position of devotional service. So the process of bhakti removes the lust. The process of bhakti gives us the information, gives us knowledge of who we are and what our duty is. And once we begin to act in that capacity, then lust is gone. And then sinful activities are gone. And again, one is reinstated in his original service to the Lord. So we can say that everything originates from forgetfulness of Krishna, of our position, of our service. Any other question before we move on?
Thank you, Maharaj. That's clear.
Hare Krishna. So we move on to the next slide. I think we are going to slide 56. Yeah, the 4 kinds of effects due to sinful activities. It is stated in the Padma Purana that there are 4 kinds of effects due to sinful activities, which are listed as follows. 1, the effect which is not yet fructified. 2, the effect which is lying as seed. 3, the effect which is already mature. And 4, the effect which is almost mature. It is also stated that all these 4 effects become immediately vanquished for those who surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, and become engaged in his devotional service in full Krishna consciousness. So, the effects of sinful activities, just as we explained, that first, the effect is yet to be fructified. That means it's like the seed form, bijam. Then we have the aprarabdha, unmanifested. Then we have the prarabdha, which is manifested. And then one begins to experience the suffering, the consequences. So, these are the stages, actually, the stages of the reaction. When we perform a sinful activity, it goes through some stages. The first stage is, it is not fructified, it is not mature, so you don't experience it. You see, sometimes when one performs a sinful activity and he gets a reaction immediately, he can understand, he can connect that because I have performed this sinful activity, this is the result. Such instant reactions are good for a living entity. He can correlate, he can see that this action is not good, that's why I'm suffering. But in most cases, it doesn't happen like that. When you perform a sin, it has to, first of all, fructify. It has to mature. We have even partly mature, fully mature through stages. First, it is not yet fructified. Then it is lying in a seed form. Then it is becoming mature. And then it becomes fully mature. And then the effect, the reaction becomes manifest. The suffering begins. So it is a bit difficult for people to connect their suffering to the sins they have performed in the past. That is how material nature is cheating everybody. People cannot link their suffering to their past deeds because at one time they performed a sin and it has taken some time for the reaction to come, so they cannot connect them. But when Krishna is kind to a living entity, he performs the sins and he gets the reaction immediately. Then he can connect that, oh, because I've performed this sinful activity, this is the reaction. And so if he's intelligent, he will avoid such actions. The material nature is so designed that the sin goes through a process. It becomes unfructified, it becomes a seed, it becomes partly mature, and then finally it becomes fully mature. And then one can experience the reactions. However, as is stated here, that all of these different levels of sins, whether it is unfructified, whether it is in a seed form, whether it is partly mature, whether it is fully mature, all of these can be vanquished in a second when one surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna promises us in the Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharma Parityajya Mamekam Shana Vraja, that surrender unto me and I will protect you from all sinful reaction. Do not fear. So that is Krishna's promise. So here, it is said that as soon as we surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead in devotional service, then all of these different stages of sinful reactions are removed. They are cleared. So that's the beauty of Bhakti. When we surrender to Krishna, Krishna will wipe off the sin. Papa Vidam. Krishna is so pure. Krishna is so potent that when we associate with Krishna, all the sinful, different stages of sinful activities are removed from the life of a devotee. And that is why it is important for us to engage in devotional service. If we don't want to suffer the reactions of our previous sins, then we must take to Krishna consciousness very seriously. And as Krishna promises, he would protect us from sinful reaction. The next slide, Krishna speaks to Uddhava. The next slide. It says, Yatagni su samidrachi karoti edamsi basmasat tata madvishaya bhaktir Udaivanam si Krishna Saha. This is from the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. My dear Uddhava, just as a blazing fire turns firewood into ashes, similarly, devotion unto me completely burns to ashes sins committed by my devotees. Of course, this does not suggest that a devotee should continuously engage in sinful activity with the hope that devotional service will burn the sinful reactions to ashes. But the fact is, whatever background we are coming from, whatever sinful activities we perform in previous lives and this life, once we take to Krishna consciousness and we are very serious in our devotional activities, Krishna is telling Uddhava here that just as a blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, devotional service unto Krishna burns to ashes sins committed by the devotee. So when the heart is purified by performing devotional service, sinful desires cannot stay there anymore. The effulgence of Bhakti Devi, the goddess of devotional service, enters the hearts of the devotee and dissipates all sin. The seeds of sin, the blinkering darkness of ignorance, all is dissipated by the presence of Bhakti. I was mentioning yesterday how the Ladini Shakti and the Sandini Shakti of Krishna, the Antaranga Shakti is divided into three. Antaranga Shakti, the internal potency of the Lord. We have Ladini Shakti, we have Samvit Shakti, and we have Sandini Shakti. So the Ladini Shakti and the Sandini Shakti combine to produce the Bhakti Shakti. And this Bhakti Shakti enters the heart of the devotee and dissipates all the sinful desires, sinful seeds, and frees the devotee from sinful inclination. So devotional service is an opportunity for the living entity to become free from sin. Otherwise, it is difficult. To live in this material world without committing sin is almost impossible. In one lecture, Srila Prabhupada mentions that even just by walking, we are committing sin because we are killing so many ants on the ground. Just by drinking water, we are committing sin because there are a lot of living entities in the water we can see, and we are drinking and digesting them. Just by setting fire, so many ants are killed in the wood, so many insects are killed, so many germs are killed just by setting fire. By grinding, we kill so many living entities. So one cannot be free from sinful reactions in as much as one has not taken full shelter of Krishna consciousness. But if one takes full shelter of Krishna consciousness, as Krishna is telling Uddhava here, that the blazing fire of devotion will completely burn to ashes all sinful reactions.
For almost 5,000.
Okay. So if I can provide 100,000.
So devotional service is the means by which one can give up sinful life and become situated in Krishna consciousness. So the next slide.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question in regard to this last slide, the last two slides actually.
Yeah.
I was a guest speaker on one global forum recently.
Okay.
And the topic is mental health.
Mental health, okay.
Mental health. And I made a statement. I said that the root cause of all mental health challenges is deliberate disobedience to the laws of nature through disregarding the proprietorship of the Lord. Disobeying the laws of nature or the order of the Lord brings ruin to a human being. Conversely, one who is sober, who knows the laws of nature, and who is not influenced by unnecessary attachment or aversion is sure to be free from mental health challenges. This is saying the same thing that this part of the Nectar of Devotion is saying indirectly. Now, my question is that when I said that, there was a reaction from one particular lady. She became so scared. And he said, your statement is like making people to become fearful of even their existence. And it's like you are condemning people by speaking this. And I explained that whether you admit it or not, human being is under the influence of nature. Even if you don't want to agree with that, our day-to-day experience shows that we are not completely in control. So, but then my question here is this, that these statements of the Lord has given the consequences and he has given solution. Now, what is it that, because we see that even in devotional service also, we see that from practical experience, sometimes devotees also, they feel these laws of Krishna consciousness, the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness are so stringent. And it's very difficult. It puts us in a kind of a suffering state of existence. How do you respond to that?
Well, the laws of nature are always there. We're in the material world, and we have a material body, So definitely, the laws of nature also affect the body. But the more situated we are in devotional service, the more we become aloof. It doesn't mean that a devotee will not experience the difficulties in the material world. But because the devotee is fully aware of his spiritual identity, of his spiritual position, he does not identify with the troubles of the body. He does not identify with the miseries of the body. Just like we see in the case of Sanatana Goswami, because that's a very exalted position, very exceptional situation, that he had itches on his body, and there were worms in these itches. And when the worms will fall out from his sore, Sanatana Goswami will pick up the worm and put it back into his body, into the sore. Because he was thinking that this living entity has to depend on my body. This living entity is nourishing his life from the sore. So if I take him out of the sore, then how does he survive? So the underlying principle is that Sanatana Goswami is no more identifying with the body and no more identifying with the misery. And therefore he can pick up the worm and put it back into his body, even though the worm is going to eat his flesh and is going to cause him pain. So it is not that devotees will not experience the misery of the world or the pain of the body, but the more we become detached, we become aloof due to our advancement in Krishna consciousness, the less we will experience the pain, the less we would be influenced by the laws of nature. So devotional service puts the living entity into a transcendental position that is no more identifying with the gross body or even the mind or even the intelligence. Actually, our suffering is due to the identification with the body, with the mind, with the intelligence, and with the ego. So long as we have a strong attachment, strong identification with these things, then suffering cannot be avoided. But the more we are detached from the mind, from the intelligence, from the ego, from the body, whatever happens to the body, we will not be so distracted by it. I remember one devotee in the early days, he was to go for one of Prabhupada's disciples. He was to go for a surgery, a hernia surgery. And so the doctors, they wanted to anesthetize the area where they're going to cut. And this devotee, he said there's no need. The doctors were surprised. They said, how? He said, don't worry. Just do your work. I'm not bothered. So the doctors, they did not anesthetize him, and they conducted the operation. And this devotee did not show any sign of pain. He did not move his body when they are cutting him. He was completely detached from the body because he was one of the initiating spiritual masters. So at the end of the operation, all the doctors became disciples because they could see that this person is transcendental to pain. Here, the normal thing is you must be anesthetized before they can cut your body so you don't feel the pain. But he objected. And then when they did the operation, he did not show any pain. It's not that he was not feeling the pain, but he was completely detached from the body and from the pain. So the body is material. The body is under the laws of nature. The body goes through hunger, tests, and so on. So, but the more we are detached from this body, the more we will not experience these things. And the less we are detached, the more we are going to experience these things. So the process of bhakti is actually meant to make us completely detached from the body. And that is why I said Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he came to teach us knowledge, detachment, and bhakti. They go together. Knowledge is required, detachment is required, then bhakti will flourish in a situation where there is knowledge and where there is detachment. So can we move on? And there are still some questions. The next slide, 58 says, next slide, 58. And the next, okay. The next one says the power of devotional service. Devotional service eradicates sinful reactions, nullifies sinful desires, counteracts material proclivities, and most importantly, uproots ignorance. Therefore, it is the only efficient way to achieve permanent relief from all suffering. So this is very, very important. Devotional service eradicates sinful reactions. It eradicates or nullifies sinful desires. It counteracts material proclivities. And most importantly, it uproots ignorance. Actually, Parikshit Maharaj recommended prayashita. Prayashita means atonement. When he was discussing the issue of Ajamil in the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, with Shukadeva Goswami, we were discussing the history of Ajamil with Parikshit Maharaj in the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the issue of sinful reactions, sinful activity comes up, how one can actually be free from sin. And Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadeva Goswami suggested prayashita, which means atonement. But Parikshit Maharaj rejected it. He said atonement does not solve the problem, because atonement does not uproot the cause of sin, which is ignorance. But the process of bhakti uproots the cause of sin, which is ignorance. Bhakti provides knowledge. Bhakti provides our link with Krishna. And so bhakti has the ability to eradicate sinful reaction, nullify sinful desire, counteract material proclivities, and uproots ignorance. Therefore, it is the only efficient way to achieve permanent relief from all suffering. The next slide talks about the second characteristic of pure devotional service, subhada. Subhada. A person who is engaged in devotional service and full Krishna consciousness is to be understood to be doing the best service to the whole world and to be pleasing everyone in the world. In addition to humanity society, he is pleasing even the trees and animals because they also become attracted by such movement. A practical example of this was shown by Lord Chaitanya when he was traveling through the forest of Jharkhand in central India for spreading his Sankirtan movement. The tigers, the elephants, the deer, and all the other wild animals joined him and were participating in their own ways by dancing and chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So, Subhada, all auspiciousness, is necessary for all living entities. Auspiciousness is necessary for all living entities. And if we go to the next slide, it talks about the parameters for auspiciousness. The next slide talks about the parameters for auspiciousness. Actually, auspiciousness means love for all living entities. It means all kinds of virtues. It means all kinds of happiness. So the parameters here are, does it benefit everyone? Does it attract everyone? Does it produce good qualities in everyone? Does it bestow superior happiness to everyone? So pure devotional service fulfills all these parameters. Pure devotional service is beneficial for everyone. Pure devotional service is attractive to everyone, even including Krishna. Pure devotional service produces good qualities in everyone. And pure devotional service brings superior happiness to everyone. So when we define auspiciousness, Subhada, then it should meet up with these parameters. Does it benefit everyone? Does it attract everyone? Does it produce good qualities in everyone? And does it bestow superior happiness in everyone? And then we see the example given that in the forest of Jharkhand, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was spreading his Sankirtan mission, even the animals, they benefited. Wild animals, they were chanting and dancing. They gave up their enmity. Deer and tiger were embracing and kissing. Wild animals, wild elephants were friendly. So this is auspiciousness. This is the symptom of auspiciousness, that everyone is benefiting. So when we talk about auspiciousness, it has to benefit everyone. And it said that when pure devotional service arises in the heart, a person is decorated with the following virtues: humility, mercy, pridelessness, giving honor to others. And because of this, the whole world becomes attracted to such a person. Like it is said that Sanatana Goswami, even till today, he is celebrated as the guru of Vrindavan. Sanatana Goswami was loved by everyone, both the gentlemen and the ungentlemen. They all love Sanatana Goswami. Every family loves Sanatana Goswami because humility, mercy, pridelessness, giving honor to others, they were fully manifested in the life of Sanatana Goswami. And therefore, everyone loved him. It is said that when there was disagreement between husband and wife, they will go to see Sanatana Goswami. When there was disagreement between business partners, they will go and see Sanatana Goswami. When there was disagreement between friends, they would meet Sanatana Goswami. When there were arguments between devotees of philosophy, they would go to meet Sanatana Goswami. And Sanatana Goswami was such a Vaishnava that he could solve every problem, because in him were fully manifested or full manifestations of humility, mercy, pridelessness, and the attitude to offer respects to others. So these are the symptoms of auspiciousness, subhada. One who is experiencing subhada must have love for all living entities, must have all these virtues, must experience unlimited happiness, and then we can say the person is experiencing subhada. So in the next verse, in the next slide, it talks about developing godly qualities. Developing godly qualities. My dear king, persons who have unflinching faith in Krishna and are without any duplicity can develop all the good qualities of the demigods. On account of a devotee's high grade of Krishna consciousness, even the demigods like to live with him, and therefore it can be understood that the qualities of the demigods have developed within him. Yashyasti Bhaktir Bhagavati Akinchana Sarvai Gunai Tatra Samasaste Suraha Haro Abhaktasya Kuto Mahaguna Manorate Nasati Danbato Bahir. All the exalted qualities of demigods are manifested in the body of one who has developed unalloyed devotion for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. On the other hand, a person devoid of devotional service and engaged in material activities has no good qualities, because he must be driven by his own mental speculation and must be engaged in serving the Lord's external energy, Maya. So, by the single stroke of bhakti, one can actually develop the superior qualities of the demigods. And the demigods, they want to associate with such a person. Exalted devotees attract even great demigods because they are the symbols of auspiciousness. Engaging in devotional service brings great auspiciousness in the life of a devotee to the degree that even the demigods are eager to associate with such a devotee. The next verse, the next slide says, a person who cannot go beyond this sphere remains impure. A person who is not in Krishna consciousness has no good qualities. He may be highly educated from an academic point of view, but in the actual field of his activities, he can be seen to be baser than the animals. Even though a person is highly educated academically, if he cannot go beyond the sphere of mental activities, then he is sure to perform only material activities and thus remain impure. So to become pure means one has to engage in bhakti. Without engaging in bhakti, one may be the greatest scholar, academician, but in as much as he is not connected to the process of bhakti, one is inclined to follow his mind, manorata. When one follows the mind, then he has to speculate. And by speculation, one will engage in sinful activities. Actually, the mind is said to be the master of the senses, is the center of the senses. And so one whose mind is not controlled, he is in trouble. Nityam dadadi karmasya. The uncontrolled mind is very dangerous. Why? Because karmo manyur madolobda shoka moha baya daya. The mind is the root cause of lust, anger, pride, greed, lamentation, illusion, and fear. Combined, these constitute bondage to fruitive activity. Therefore, which learned person would put faith in the mind? So one who has not developed bhakti, one who has no connection with bhakti, may be the greatest scholar, greatest academician, but he still hovers on the mental plane. He hovers on the mental platform. And therefore, he is simply playing around with the is playing around with the roots or the extensions of the conditioned mind, which are lust, anger, pride, greed, lamentation, illusion, and fear. These are characteristics of the conditioned mind. So one who is not practicing bhakti, one who is not connected to the process of bhakti, he becomes a servant of these offsprings of the mind. And that is why it is said here, even though a person is highly educated academically, if he cannot go beyond the sphere of mental activities, then he is sure to perform only material activities and thus remain impure. But as soon as we engage in Krishna consciousness, we can transcend the mind and come to the spiritual platform. The next slide talks about that. Devotional service is truly auspicious. The next slide. Devotional service is truly all auspicious. Only devotional service is all attractive, all beneficial, can develop saintly character, and can bestow superior happiness. Therefore, only devotional service is truly all auspicious. Devotional service is attractive. Devotional service is all beneficial. Devotional service allows one to develop saintly character, and it can bestow superior happiness onto the living entity, and therefore devotional service is truly auspicious. Actually, one can say the most auspicious thing in this material world is devotional service. So the next slide talks about moksha lagu takrita. One derives happiness on liberation. In the Tantra Shastra, Lord Shiva speaks to his wife, Sati, in this way: my dear wife, a person who has surrendered himself at the lotus feet of Govinda and who has thus developed pure Krishna consciousness can be very easily awarded all the perfections desired by the impersonalists. And beyond this, he can enjoy happiness achieved by the pure devotees. So, Lord Shiva is an authority. And he's telling us here, he's actually telling the wife, he's speaking to his wife, that a person who has surrendered himself to Govinda and who has that developed pure Krishna consciousness can very easily be awarded all the perfection desired by the impersonalists. And beyond that, he can enjoy happiness achieved by pure devotees. So we are going to the next verse, which is talking about the different kinds of happiness. The different kinds of happiness. The next slide. The 3 types of happiness. Actually, sometimes it is said 4 times. Here it is mentioned 3. It says Srila Rupa Goswami has divided happiness into 3 categories. Jadananda. Jadananda means happiness produced from the material world. Material world is called Jada. So happiness coming from the material world is called Jadananda. Then happiness coming from the Brahman realization, Brahmananda. Sometimes happiness coming from the Atma, Paramatma, is called Atmananda. And then we have happiness coming from pure Krishna consciousness. That is called Premananda. Rupa Goswami describes the 3 here, but in other places, a 4th one is mentioned as Atmananda. Those who are yogis who are into meditation on the super soul, they experience what is called Atmananda because they are connected to the super soul. The soul is connected to the super soul. They derive some happiness, which is called Atmananda. So that Atmananda, even Premananda, can also be considered as Atmananda. So these are the 3 types of happiness. Material happiness is called Jadananda, produced from material energy. Happiness from the Brahmajyoti is called Brahmananda, happiness derived from the Brahman realization. And happiness derived from Krishna is called Premananda. So Premananda is the topmost happiness. That's the real happiness. Happiness in association of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anandamayi Vyasat. The living entity is always looking for happiness. The living entity is always searching for happiness because we are naturally seekers of happiness. We are coming from the source of happiness. Krishna is the ocean of happiness. And being part and parcel of that ocean, naturally we are inclined towards happiness. And that is why everyone in this material world is is working. We are all working because we want to derive some happiness. The driving force of all action, activity in the material world is happiness, joy. If that is taken out, nobody will engage in any activity. So therefore, everyone is searching for that happiness. But we cannot find it in the material atmosphere. And that happiness, that eternal happiness, that supreme happiness, that we are looking for, we cannot experience it in this material world. So devotional service gives us the opportunity to experience that superior happiness called Premananda. So I say happiness derived from devotional service is eternal. Happiness derived from pure devotional service is the highest because it is eternal. The happiness derived from material perfection or understanding oneself to be Brahman is inferior because it is also temporary. There is no preventing one's falling down from material happiness. And there is even every chance of falling down from the spiritual happiness derived out of identifying oneself with the impersonal Brahman. That is the next slide, slide 66. This is 65. These are the three types of happiness: Jadananda, Brahmananda, and Premananda. And of these, Premananda is permanent. Premananda is eternal. Jadananda is temporary, and even Brahmananda is temporary. So the next slide is devotional service. Happiness in devotional service is eternal. Happiness derived from pure devotional service is the highest because it is eternal. The happiness derived from material perfection or understanding oneself to be Brahman is inferior because it is temporary. There is no preventing one's falling down from material happiness. And there is even every chance of falling down from the spiritual happiness derived out of identifying oneself with the impersonal Brahman. Actually, we have gone over our time by 10 minutes. And I don't know, today being Sunday, maybe some temples, there are some programs, some devotees want to go to the temple. So I think we can end here. Hare Krishna, it's like we've gone halfway of the lesson. Next week we continue. So, yes, you're welcome. What is your question, Prabhu?
My humble obeisance at the Lord. There's a question in the chat box.
Okay. Question in the chat box. Let's see. As we are trying to take up the process of bhakti, the goal is to go back home, back to Godhead, or attain the bona fide type of liberation. All right, please, can you explain us properly to understand the difference between the supreme goal and this liberation referred to by the characteristics of pure devotion, pure bhakti? That's one. Two, also, Nectar devotion defines bhakti as loving devotional service to Krishna. Please, we would like to ask the difference between love and devotion. Okay, so the first question is, can you explain so we understand the difference between the supreme goal and this liberation referred to by the characteristics of pure bhakti? The supreme goal. Yeah, the supreme goal is Krishna. See, the word liberation has a number of meanings. So sometimes liberation means freedom from the miseries of this material world. When one is free from the miseries of the material world, he is considered liberated. That's one definition of liberation. Another definition of liberation is when one merges with the Brahman Jyoti of the Lord, the effulgence of the Lord. That is another definition of liberation. However, when one attains devotional service, when one attains perfection in devotional service, that is also described as liberation. that is, should be understood as the supreme liberation. Supreme liberation means becoming a pure devotee, becoming connected to Krishna, gaining Krishna's association. That is considered the supreme liberation. So, becoming free from material pangs, becoming free from material suffering may be described as liberation, but it does not necessarily mean that one is on the topmost platform of liberation, which is Krishna consciousness, love of Godhead. Or one who is in the Brahman Jyoti, who has merged with the effulgence of the Lord, does not mean that one is experiencing love of Godhead, which is considered a supreme liberation. So, in one sense, love of Godhead is described as a supreme liberation, but in another sense, freedom from the pains of material existence and merging with the supreme Brahman are also described as liberation. So these two types of liberation, that is what devotional service is rejecting. That is what the characteristics of devotional service is rejecting. Liberation from material pangs, liberation by merging into the Brahman effulgence is rejected. That is Sayuja, is rejected by pure devotees, is rejected. But when one develops pure love for Krishna and enters into Krishna's association, that is also described as liberation, but that is supreme liberation. So that is accepted. The difference between love and devotion, actually there's no difference. Devotion is the activity. That's why it's called devotional service. When you are devoted to someone, you want to perform an activity to please him. So devotion leads to love. Devotional service leads to love. So we can say they are one and the same, because by performing devotion, you will end up loving Krishna. By serving somebody, by rendering service to somebody, we become attached to the person. And that is love. So devotion is the beginning, and love is the end. It is the same, but different stages. Devotional service leads to prema, leads to love of Godhead. Without engaging in devotion, you cannot experience prema. So we can say that devotion is the beginning, and prema or love is the end result. So they are both connected, because one must engage in devotion in order to experience prema or love. So the difference is, one is the activity, devotion is the activity, and love or prema is the result, is the final point. I don't know whether that is clear. Whoever has asked the question, if that is clear, then we can round it up here, and then we continue.
It's Chetan Bhagwat Prabhu, and he said, yes, Maharaj. Thank you very much.
All right, so then we can continue from slide 67 next Saturday.
Yes. Thank you very much, Maharaj, for the wonderful presentation. We are indebted to you.
Yeah, we are indebted to Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you so very much. So we'll request all of the devotees, please kindly unmute. Let us loudly chant Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Who want to voice? Wonderful.
presentation. Hare Krishna, Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna, Rasa Vilas.
Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Rama,
Krishna
Hare
Krishna,
Rama,
Hare
Rama
Hare,
Rama,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you very much,
Srila
Maharaj.
Prabhu
Thank
ki
you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Ananta Koti Vaishnava Kundai ki jai.
Rasa Vilas, you didn't raise up your hand when saying Hare Krishna. Why?
I did Hare Krishna.
You were caught in the act and it has passed now. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, madam. All glory to you. Hare Krishna. Okay, that's all right. You may go and prepare for your Sunday program. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Please, we'll be working on your slogans individually, please. We can come up any day to ask you to come for slogans. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. The Prabhupada. Jai.
Navapremayutam Navanitasutam Navaveshakritam Navapremaratam Navadhavilasa Shubha Premamayam Pranamami Sachisutam Gauravaram Navapremayutam Navanitasutam Navaveshakritam Navapremaratam.
Hare Krishna, devotee, thank you very much for joining. We see each and every one of us again on Saturday next week. Hare Bol.